No? All right, welcome everyone to a special live edition of Spurs Chat with Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn, our Spurs beat writers, and columnist Mike Finger, who is joining us remotely from the NBA Finals up in Dallas, a secure location up there. Mike, talk to us a little bit about the finals.
Well, I'm excited to be at the finals. Disappointed not to be there for In Vivo, our first In Vivo that the Express News is doing. I know our crack team behind the scenes has worked really hard on this. We've got a lot of questions coming in, a lot of listeners, viewers this time. Um, Maybe in the future we'll be covering some NBA finals involving the San Antonio Spurs, but not quite yet. And looking forward to answering all your questions. We're going to talk about the draft. The Spurs, as loyal listeners of the Spurs Insider podcast know, have two top 10 picks this year. Number 4 overall, number 8 overall. That was awarded to them as a result of a trade with the Toronto Raptors for Jakob Poeltl. This isn't the best draft in history. There's no Victor Wembanyama in this draft, but they could get two pretty good prospects in the top 10 here. So we'll talk all about that. Looking forward to hearing your questions. Glad Tom Orsborn dressed up for the occasion. Looking forward to hear all of his insight, and let's do it.
All right, Jeff, two picks in the draft. What are we looking at with these two picks, and why do they want, or what do the Spurs looking for exactly with these two picks to kind of help Victor Wembanyama out?
I think when you've won 22 games or only 22 games for 2 years in a row, you obviously have a lot of needs. Like, it's hard to go wrong. You're gonna feel some sort of need. But if you really want to drill down and what do you need the most, I think we've talked about it a lot. You want to upgrade the point guard position, even though we love Trey Jones. I don't think the Spurs look at him as the point guard of the future going forward 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now with Victor. And you want to upgrade your shooting because they were although they made more 3-pointers last year than any Spurs team in Spurs history. They were also in the middle of the pack in terms of volume, and also were near the bottom of the pack in terms of percentage. So you're going to want to look at point guards and shooting would be my two areas of most need for this team.
All right, Tom, you were up there at the combine. What did you see from those guys up there, and who might be able to fit some of those roles?
Well, a lot of them stood out in trying to sell themselves as trying to fit that role. Stephen Castle from UConn was the most vociferous as far as trying to say, hey, I want to play point guard. I want to go to a team that needs a point guard, a long-term point guard. And, he's got the skill set to fit that application, so to speak. So, but yeah, the combine, you watch those guys work out, you watch the testing and all that, but the best part is the interviews. You get some insight into who they are. And Castle was very self-assured, very aggressive. And so a lot of those guys were like that, just really trying to sell themselves.
All right, and a reminder to our audience, we'll be answering questions at some point.
Themselves.
Yeah, a few minutes in, or maybe 10, 15 minutes into this chat here. So get into the app here and put your questions in there and let us know, and we'll answer anything Spurs related. Please, Spurs related, not about Jeff's hat or anything like that. But
baby, ask me anything.
Ask you anything. He'll also answer questions about Pearl Jam as well. So yeah. So Mike, what are you kind of seeing from what the Spurs need for this draft, and what do you think they're going to do?
One really fascinating thing that I think Jeff and Tom will agree with me on is just how the perception of the Spurs in this league has changed with the addition of the tall, skinny French kid. Like, we are not used to Jeff and Tom. Shoot, all three of us have been around a long time covering this team through eras when they were winning championships every year, and or at least competing for championships every year. And you never sort of heard the Spurs mentioned in that rumor mill that goes on every offseason. And it's weird to cover an organization now that, as one national NBA writer mentioned to me last night, The Spurs are now in the rumor prestige zone, where every star that wants his name out there, that has an agent that wants to create some kind of stir, um, every player that feels like he needs to bump up his profile a little bit is going to end up in a this guy to the Spurs rumor. And it's a new age in covering San Antonio now, because that just wasn't the case back in the Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker days. And so I think it's an adjustment for people who cover the Spurs. It's an adjustment for people who root for the Spurs and consume all of this stuff. You have to sort of become discerning in figuring out which of these reports have teeth to them and actually have some substance to them, and which are sort of feeding that beast, that content aggregation beast that, you know, LeBron James has been a part of forever. Kevin Durant has been part of forever. So sorting through all that noise is part of the offseason now. And to get back, I know I avoided your question about what they're going to do. This is just kind of my way of saying there's all kinds of things they can do, because, like Tom mentioned at the combine, Stephon Castle is selling himself on being a point guard because he sees that if he can be a point guard with Victor Wembanyama, that could be really, really good for him. Like, to be able to throw lobs to that guy, like, who wouldn't want to do that? So this is becoming kind of a destination spot, San Antonio is, for players around the league. And I think that adds just multiple layers to trying to sort through what a team is going to do in the offseason. Are they going to make these two picks? That's the number one issue that we can sort of talk through today. They don't have to. They can trade one of them for a player. They could trade both of them to move up in the draft. I doubt they do those things. I'll open this up to Jeff and Tom. I think they're probably going to make both picks. But I don't think that's like 90% sure. I think that there's a significant chance, a non-zero chance that they pull off a trade. I just think that making 4 and 8 is most likely. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, when you say this new normal is going to be an adjustment for all of us, covering, watching, fans following the team, it's going to be exhausting for all of us, is what you mean, I think. Because if you get on Twitter or any of your, I guess it's not Twitter anymore, whatever they call it now. If you get on whatever your preferred, wherever you get your quote unquote news and rumors, like, you'll see tons of stuff about the Spurs now that, I mean, there's so much of it that it's you can't sort through it all, and it can't all be true. And you can leave, if you read everything and believe everything, you end up leaving more confused or less certain about what might happen than you were when it began. So I think taking everything with a grain of salt and kind of realizing that nobody really knows anything for sure is a good way to approach it.
And I think,
what was your question? I didn't answer it.
Well, just to add to that, we talk about the peek behind the curtain. Peek behind the rumor mill curtain is, there's, for every trade discussed, for every deal that GMs are talking about, there's two sides to it, right? So when you're reading these Spurs rumors, I feel pretty confident saying that less than 10% of the sourcing is coming from Spurs lane or the Spurs side of things. And a lot of this comes out through agents who might want good things for their clients. It could come from other front offices who say, hey, and this isn't to say these reports aren't true. If another front office lets out that, hey, the Spurs might be interested in Darius Garland from Cleveland, might be talking to Atlanta about their guards. Like, some of that comes from other teams. And when the Spurs are in this rumor prestige zone, as it was put last night, like, there's a lot of different ways for info to get out, and sorting through it can be challenging, as you said. But to get back to, will the Spurs make picks 4 and 8 at the end of this month? The draft is on it's a 2-day draft now. First day on June 26th, second day on June 27th. On June 26th in Brooklyn, will the Spurs make the number 4 and number 8 selections, Jeff and Tom?
I'd like to talk about the second round picks. Will they make both their second round picks?
Can you stop avoiding the question?
I think what you said earlier is correct. I mean, I think the highest probability is they make them both, just because this, even though there has been some smoke out there about, hey, the Hawks might, everyone seems to think that Zachary Risache seems to be emerging as the number one pick, but the Hawks might not want him. They might want somebody else. So there is some smoke about the Hawks wanting to trade down, and maybe if the Spurs really like Risache, they can move up and take him. But I just don't think anybody in this draft really moves the needle so much that you want to trade both your 4th and 8th pick to move up a little bit. Now, if there's a way to make a trade where you don't lose that 8th, maybe you trade the 4th and keep the 8th and move up and trade something in the future to move up with the 4th pick. Maybe you look at it that way. But if you're just asking for sheer probability, I would say the odds are greatest that they're going to make both their picks.
Yeah, kind of when I was in Chicago for the combine and talked lottery and talked to Brian Wright after they wound up with number 4 and number 8, a little bit of a tell from him saying, in effect, that there's better talent in this draft than people think. I don't know. I kind of saw that as an indication that, yeah, maybe they'll stick with those 2 picks, and there are some players that they see that fit them well and that can be better than what people are thinking.
There's going to be an all-star or 2 in this draft. And the reason I say that is because there always is. There's never been a draft in history that hasn't produced at least one all-star. Just the trick in one like this, like it's not like last year where, that's Victor Wembanyama. This year, you don't know where that guy comes from. He might come at 4. He might come at 8. He might come at 12. He might come at 3. He might come at any point in that first round. But
are we going to fill out this hour with just naming every pick?
He might come at 18. He might come at 17. He might come at 23. He might come at 24. He might come at
a lot of numbers. If it's the Spurs, he might come at 29. That's the.
Do we want to start talking individual players, or are there questions in the queue, Nick? Can you tell? Well,
we got some questions in the queue. We already answered one from Jeremy Gold.
We're here to answer questions in the queue. That let the listeners.
We don't want to talk to each other. We're sick of that.
We do have quite a few questions going through it. Jeremy Gold had asked about the packaging the 4 and 8 picks for the Hawks number 1. I think we already got his question there. So let's get this question from Alan. He wants to say, why not Donovan Klingon? How do you say Donovan's last name correctly?
Donovan Klingon.
Klingon.
Depends on if you're a Star Trek fan.
I like Klingon. Yeah. I'm Star Trek guy, so I always screw up his name. I think he's.
They might take Steve Romulan.
But why not his question is, why not form the second coming of Twin Towers and take the big kid from UConn?
Who wants to take that one? How are we gonna do this?
I will start it just because I tend to start these things.
Okay.
He likes to talk the most.
Yes. That is a fascinating question. And I guess part of the answer is that if you remember the way the Spurs started Victor Wembanyama's rookie season, was having him play power forward alongside a big guy playing center, doing all that dirty work. I don't think Zach Collins has Donovan Klingon's upside, but it sort of gives you a preview of what a Twin Towers look might look like for the Spurs, and it didn't go great. And I'm not pouring cold water on the possibility that could go better with a different player, with a better player, but the Spurs played so much better when Victor was playing center. And the funny thing about that is Victor sort of doesn't want to be a center, or he doesn't consider himself a center. He considers himself a unicorn, a 4, that type of guy. A point center. But I think it's that is the concern. Like you see all the upside of, thinking back to the old days, Tim and David playing alongside each other and how well that worked for the Spurs. And you can sort of squint and see a future where the Spurs just have the paint locked down with Victor Wembanyama and Donovan Klingon for the next 15 years, and how intimidating and how imposing and how awesome that would be for the Spurs in their future. But then and this is gonna be a common theme with every player we mention on this podcast, because that's just kind of how the draft works. There's also a downside, and that is those two guys just don't work well together. And the offense seemed to be so much more free flowing when Victor didn't have that big guy in the middle kind of clogging things up last year. So that would be my concern in taking Donovan Clingan. I see the upside, but I also see that the Spurs, Jeff, you can speak to this, all the efficiency numbers, everything looked better when Victor was playing the 5 last year, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think as the questioner kind of alludes to, I think a lot of Spurs fans just remember the glory days when it was Tim and David playing those twin tower roles, and like you said, just locking down the paint. I mean, that's how they won their early titles, was nobody could score on them. But the game has changed a lot since 1999, since 2003, and it's just difficult to run a twin towers kind of configuration, especially offensively. Unless both of those guys are like Victor Wembanyama, that would probably work if you could clone him. But I think the problem with Clingan right now is just not much offense there, at least in terms of shooting, perimeter shooting. And they really, like you said last year, really figured out that it works better if you can get on offense, if you can get the paint clear and let Victor have that space to work with. So it really becomes, how do you weigh defense versus offense? Like if you want to go defense with Clingan, it's going to necessarily mean your offense is going to take a step back. So it's finding that balance, and that would be the reason not to take Donovan, is just the offensive rawness there.
All right. Speaking of offense, our next question from Vaughn. Is it Vaughn here? It says, how about freshman Reed Shepherd from Kentucky? Shot over 50%. Spurs need shooting.
Is that your guy, Tom? You like Reed?
Well, I did like him until draft expert Mike Finger really shot him down.
On one of
I thought you were going to say Mike Finger just obliterated him, saying that he was terrible in the
I thought you were going to say like
tournament appearance,
like hit and run your car.
He had a good combine though, didn't he?
Yeah, he can shoot, man. He can shoot, and I mean that's his calling card. So if Spurs are looking for a shooter at number 8, Reed Shepherd might be their guy.
You think Reed Shepherd will last to number 8?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Reed Shepherd's not going to last till number 8. If you want Reed Shepherd, you take him at 4, and you might not get him at 4. And
I do think there's
Tom is sort of joking about my obliteration of Reed Shepherd, and that was on a previous edition of the Spurs Insider podcast.
Based on one game, he had one bad game his entire freshman season at Kentucky. Finger says he's dead to me.
Dead, yeah.
Dead to me.
Just awful.
That was on a previous edition of the Spurs Insider podcast, which the newcomers here to In Vivo, if the In Vivo participants don't know about the Spurs Insider podcast, it comes out every Wednesday during the season, every other Wednesday in the off season, and we sometimes talk about stuff like this, and sometimes we put our feet in our mouths by being too hard on Reed Shepherd. My only point with that was, and it was poorly.
It was all right.
No, it was
in that one game.
Yeah,
it was poorly made, but the point was like all these guys have pluses and minuses, and there's a downside to all these guys in this not great draft. And Reed Shepherd in the biggest game of his year as a freshman kind of was a dud in the NCAA tournament. But that's unfair because everybody has a dud, and you're not going to discount a clearly awesome NBA prospect based on one NCAA tournament game. That was silly of me. Mea culpa, what have you. The Rockets might take him at 3. Like people really like him. And he's a smaller guard. He's not like, the reason why I prefer Stephon Castle of Connecticut is because of that positional versatility. Castle can guard probably every position from 1 to 3. He has a willingness to learn the point guard position. I would sort of want to we can talk more about Castle later, but another conversation I was having with somebody last night about the idea of the Spurs drafting a point guard who isn't a true point guard, and asking, why is that different than the disaster of the Jeremy Sohan experience last year? Well, Jeremy Sohan didn't want to be a point guard. Like he agreed to try. But Tom, you can speak to this. Like Stephon Castle really, really, really wants to be a point guard. And if he's not one yet, just the desire to want to do it, like I think that puts him off on a better start than they had with Jeremy last year. And I think he has more point guard skills than Jeremy did. So to me, I take Castle over Shepard if I have that choice. I'm not positive that Brian Wright and R.C. Buford and Greg Popovich feel the same way. But yeah, I can't remember what the question was, how we got there, but that's, it was
it was just about Reed Shepard.
It was just about Reed
And
Shepard.
I would say, just to conclude that discussion, I not that they might be able to get Reed Shepard at 4, but I think there is some impetus in this draft to go get a guy that can shoot, not a guy that you have to teach to shoot, which is everybody they've drafted lately, besides Victor, has been guys you have to teach to shoot. And I think it'd be nice with one of these 2 picks to get a guy that's already proven that he can knock it down, even if that's the only thing he can do. So maybe if you don't get Reed Shepard at 4, maybe you get like a Dalton Connect at 8 or something like that.
They brought in Boogie Ellis last weekend from USC. He's a smallish point guard along the lines of Trey Jones, but he shot 41% last season and 38% from 3 for his career. So yeah, I mean, I think that indicates they're casting a wide net looking for shooters to fill that.
The one thing that hasn't changed about the game of basketball is the object is still to make the ball go in the basket. So having guys that can do that already is not a bad thing.
All right, we got a question from Andrew here. Podcast listener, by the way, he's following up on. He's following up on our podcast from that we just spoke about being Keldon and a member of the community. But he also pointed out that, if you look at the trade mill, Keldon's usually the name that is in there for the Spurs to, kind of package and get one of these bigger superstars. And he wants to know whether or not his standing in the community and what he does extra will help him stay a Spur.
No.
Not at all.
No, no,
not at all. An analogy to this would be like Lonnie Walker was the same way. Like he was just as involved in the.
This
loved it.
Doesn't enter into it.
They didn't trade Lonnie, but they weren't going to re-sign him. So if they can improve the team, all the great things that Keldon does in the community aren't going to amount to a hill of beans. I mean, that's just the way the business goes. We want to talk about why seems to be in all these trade rumors. Does anybody want to take that?
Are you asking me?
I just said anybody.
Anybody,
right?
First of all, I will take a bit of this is a shock. I'll take a bit of a contrarian view on your dismissal of Andrew's premise there.
Never mind, just be quiet.
The business of basketball, you're right. Like if a trade of Keldon makes the Spurs better, then no amount of public service is going to keep him a Spur. But I think that having a guy like Keldon, who has been here so long and been sort of the same player he's been for so long, he's sort of underrated by us, by Spurs fans, by lots of people, as to like they got him in the 20s of that draft, right? It was the late first round, 29. Pretty good. Like the night they drafted him, if they knew he would turn into what he's become, they'd take that in a heartbeat. And the fact
they probably would have taken him where they took Luka Šamanić if they knew he was going to become what he became.
Right.
And wouldn't have waited.
If you have a guy like that, a productive NBA player, which he is, and he has his warts like lots of NBA players have, but if you have a player like that who wants to be in San Antonio, loves being in San Antonio, is beloved in the locker room, which he is, all those things, like it makes you not necessarily say that he's untradeable, but it makes you double check, be absolutely sure that the trade that you're making is going to improve your team. And I think it plays in, like Brian Wright, R.C. Buford, Greg Popovich, these are human beings who have connections with people and they like the guy. And that's only natural that you're going to make absolutely sure that the deal is correct before you get rid of them. They're not looking. I think this is sort of a gray area too. When you hear that someone is on the trade block or the Spurs are discussing Keldon Johnson deals, it's not because they don't like Keldon Johnson. It's because other teams value him and he's right. And so if you want to make a big deal, if you want to make a significant trade, you're going to have to offer somebody a value. And in a way, it's a compliment to Keldon that his name is mentioned in a lot of these things, because that means that other teams want him. So I just think sometimes when we hear player X is on the trade block, that does not mean that the team of player X doesn't like him. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. So that's what I'd say there.
The other funny thing that oh, go ahead.
No.
The other funny thing that happens is the flip side that fans do. Are like, this guy sucks, trade him. And it's like, well, if he sucks, how are you going to trade him?
Yeah.
But just to address the question, do you recall who Greg Popovich would have called his favorite member of the San Antonio Spurs in 2011?
Oh, that would be Kawhi Leonard.
No, well, he would have called
Georgie Hill. You're talking about
George Hill was Pop's favorite player. It was a quote. He's my favorite player. And do you remember what happened to Georgie Hill in 2011?
He got traded for Kawhi Leonard.
So if the Spurs have a way to trade for a Kawhi Leonard type, future Kawhi Leonard, and the only holdup is they have to trade Keldon Johnson, they're going to pull that trigger in a heartbeat. To go to what you said, though, where Keldon's been so valuable the last few years is just his personality is real, and his upbeat personality and keeping everything like light. And I mean, you win 20 games, 22 games in consecutive seasons. That has the potential to be just a complete draining butt whip of a year, day after day after day. And you need guys like Keldon who are just happy to be at work. Maybe don't need a team of those guys. Like, you also need some guys that are upset that you're losing a lot, but the balance is important. And this could have been these years would have been a lot harder in the locker room if it weren't for a guy like Keldon Johnson. And that's important too. It's not a factor that says you can't trade him, but it is a factor you have to consider. So I will agree with you there.
All right. We probably need to answer some more of these questions. We got quite a few of them. Alec wants to know why gather all these second round picks if they're not going to use them, and what are we going to use these picks on?
They're going to trade them for stuff eventually. They're going to trade them for stuff. I mean, the way they got them is the way they're going to get rid of them. 4 second round picks for Josh Richardson. Flash forward 4 years from now, whatever that version of Josh Richardson is that you need to be like the one piece to a playoff team, the one little missing piece. You can throw 4 second round picks because they're just like candy to you. There's pennies laying around. You have so many of them. I mean, if worse comes to worse, you can just sell them. Cash is nice too. So they're not going to make them all. They're just nice. It's nice to have.
Maybe for a team that scouts as well as the Spurs do, it's a safety net. There's people in the second round that we know can become Hall of Fame players. So
like the Joker, Manu.
Yeah, they've got it.
Trey Jones.
It's there if they need it.
It's the modern NBA currency, and Jeff put it perfectly. It's the way you acquire Josh Richardson's and Doug McDermott's and Jetty Osman's whenever you're ready to contend. And it's sort of like crypto in a way, right? Like everyone sort of agreed that these picks have value that might exceed their actual value, but it's how you acquire players like that. And there's going to come a time, maybe not next year, maybe not the year after that, but in the future, when the Spurs just need a Josh Richardson type for a playoff run. And when you have all those extra picks lying around, that's how you get them. And also, like Tom said, for a team that scouts well, if you don't use the picks and you have like 3 second round picks in a year, second round picks don't get guaranteed deals, right? You can just take 3 swings, bring 3 guys into a training camp in 2027. And if one of them turns into Trey Jones or Manu Ginobili or whatever, you keep them. And if the other 2 don't, you let those go. It just gives you more at bats in the draft. And like the questioner is right. Like, they're never going to make all
never
going to
make them all.
And it's probably excessive, and they're probably never going to amount to anything, but it's better to have them than to not have them.
All right. We got a couple questions about individual players. So I'm going to combo these up a little bit, because maybe this may be like talking about pick 8. Carson wants to know about Rob Dillingham and how he's not a great defender, but does he fit with the Spurs at all? And of course, then Jahil wants to know about Dalton Connect and whether or not the Spurs should take him at 8.
Dillingham talking about selling yourself, marketing yourself. When I talked to him at the combine. He really tried to sell himself as a great complementary piece to Wemby. Make his life easier, would look for him all the time. Tweeted that quote, and man, did Spur fans eat it up.
How else did he market himself at the combine though, or anti-market himself?
Yeah, refresh my memory.
Didn't you tell me? He kind of said, "I don't play defense," or
oh yeah,
play defense.
That was astonishingly honest. Yeah, he said defense.
It's like Bill Murray in Space Jam.
That's not my jam, so to speak. But
that's an original Space Jam reference, by the way.
He's really honest
James
about
Harden.
that, and that of course,
to be fair to young Mr. Dillingham, I think what he was getting at is I can be better in that area.
Yeah,
maybe you didn't see it on film, but I can be better in that.
Sure.
Area. He wasn't saying that I suck at it and I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
He was actually probably saying the opposite.
In a forum though, where you really try to sell your strong suits, it was pretty wild to hear him say.
I think the main, I mean, there's a lot to like with that guy. I think the main question, because everyone in this draft is going to have here's a reason why not. And the main question was just size.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of the Spurs looking for a point guard is they just don't think Trey Jones has the size to be your point guard going forward for years upon years in this modern NBA. Like they list Trey at 6'1", and I'm not sure that he's 6'1". So they want to increase the size at that position, and Dillingham really doesn't do that. So that would be the kind of the one little knock on him.
He does shoot much better than Trey Jones.
Yes,
at least did coming in. Probably shoots better than him now. You never know how much stock to put into the rises and falls of prospects in this month leading up to the draft. But from everything that I've gathered, and Tom, I'm not sure if you talked to this guy in Chicago, but it sounds like Devin Carter is.
I was just going to bring him up.
Devin Carter's moving.
We're done yapping your gums. That's what I was going to say.
Is moving ahead of Rob Dillingham on the point guard sort of depth chart in the draft. And a comp that I've heard for him is Derek White, which Derek White would be a perfect San Antonio Spur right now moving forward. And it's understandable why the Spurs moved on. If the Spurs still had Derek White, they would not have Victor Wembanyama. But if you could find the next Derek White, a guy who does the little things, a productive college player, as Derek was at Colorado, Devin Carter, a productive player at Providence at both ends of the floor, can make a shot, can defend. I unless it's just all smoke these past couple of weeks, I would guess that the Spurs are more likely to take Devin Carter than Rob Dillingham.
I probably agree, and I want to talk about Devin Carter for a while, even though that wasn't the question that was asked. He was the guy I wanted to make sure we brought up on this thing because, especially when those other point guards are off the board, Stephon Castle. It sounds like Topic, he might fall just because of injury concerns. Not sure about that, but
he had a second ACL recently.
Yeah, if you get to 8 and those guys are gone, or you don't want to take that risk, Carter's the guy that's really been rocketing up the draft boards, and he started out as like a defensive specialist. Like he's going to play hard on defense. He has that dog in him, as the young guys like to say. But last year at Providence, he also emerged as like an offensive player too. He averaged 19 points a game, Big East Player of the Year. He's going to be one of the best two-way guards in the draft, and that's the kind of guy that the Spurs are looking at. And Derek White was the perfect comp for him to me. It's a guy that starts off just doing the little things, doing the dirty work, kind of a connector piece. But if you get him on the right team, where he can just be a piece. Part of Derek's deal here was he was younger, and they were also asking him to be a number 2 and sometimes a number 1 on certain nights. And that's not what he is. But you look at him in Boston when he's older, more experienced, he's there 3 or 4, just kind of a connecting piece, doing all the dirty work. That's where he's thriving. I think that's where Devin Carter can thrive also. The other thing I'd say about Devin Carter, though, is he's an athletic version of Derek White. He was a combine star this year that Tom covered. It set the record for the 3/4 court sprint, was tied for first in the vertical jump. So he's going to give you a lot of athleticism. He's going to play hard, shoots better than probably any of the point guards being talked about in the top 10. So I think he's definitely a guy that Spurs fans and the Spurs certainly should keep their eyes on, especially maybe at 8.
Yeah, Derek had that period where he needed to believe that he belonged, that Pop talked about a lot. That was something they worked on with him for a long time. And this guy might have the mindset just the opposite. I belong right away.
All right. David has a question that's kind of similar on the same track of what we're talking about. He wants to know, he says a couple of years ago we defined Jeremy Sohan as coming into the draft as a platonic ideal for Popovich based on his life experience and character. He wants to know if there's anyone in this draft that kind of fits that same Spurs mold.
You mean culturally?
Yeah, culture. Who fits the Spurs culture in this draft? When you look at this, do
you got any answers for that? I mean, this is gonna feel like I don't know what, but one of the international guys.
Yeah, probably. The easy thing is hey, an international guy.
Draft one of the French kids, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know a lot about those guys personally to be able to say like, oh, they're Pop guys or not Pop guys at this point. I haven't talked to them.
I don't know how good they are.
Maybe somebody else
choosing wine and
as a way to introduce a new name that we haven't talked about yet. But the segue to the international guy who might be there at 8 is Tidjane Salaam. I know nothing about whether, like you guys said, about
I think how he just wanted to say his name.
Right. I don't know how he'd fit personality wise, but it's another French guy who could come in and be able to speak to Victor in multiple languages. And they apparently towards the end of the playoffs over there in France, he really shot up teams' draft boards and would seem to be a guy. I believe he's a wing type. He can shoot. He can defend. Seems to have a lot of Spursian qualities to him. It's a really good question. By the way, that question was very well thought out and well composed and hit on a lot of levels and might be too highbrow for us. But I just want to compliment. I want to compliment the question. I think that's something that the Spurs do consider when they make draft picks, is personality wise. Unfortunately, the people on this in Vivo just haven't had a chance to meet some of these prospects and speak to it. But really good question, and something that I'm sure Brian Wright and RC and Dave Tellep and all those guys are going to consider when they make these picks.
I'm going to change my pick, my answer, and go back to Devin Carter, because everyone else we've talked about on this so far is 19 years old. Devin Carter's 22, so he can drink with Pop like right off the bat.
There you go.
Well, there's something to be said for that. I mean, Pop has lamented quite a bit the last couple of years. The one and done guys come in. You got to teach them fundamentals. You got to work with them in a number of areas, maturity wise, but mainly fundamentals. And there's some guys, Dalton Connect.
Oh, they asked about that. Someone asked about that. We just glossed over.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy that has some college experience, Boogie Ellis, 5 years. Those guys are breaking the mold of what the Spurs have had to go through the last couple of years.
I think I think the ideal is to have a combination of those kind of guys when you have so many picks all in a row. I don't think you want to take all 19-year-olds or all 22-year-olds. I think there's some balance you can strike there.
Another positive of having both a 4 and an 8. You can take a little out of column A, a little out of column B, and they might do that. What's next, Nick?
Oh, we have a few questions in the same kind of realm. JT and Xavier are both kind of hitting on the same issue here about the number of picks the Spurs have when you have this many assets. What's the appropriate way for the Spurs to use them? Should they trade some of these picks? Should they go after the bigger names with these picks? And we've already talked about whether they should make these 2, but do they have all these other ones in the future too? At what point do they start cashing in their chips?
I mean, it's hard to just pick a date, but when it makes sense, and when that makes sense to the Spurs front office and when that makes sense to fans might not be the same timeline, the same timetable. I don't get a sense there's a big push within the Spurs organization to push those chips into the center of the pot this summer, for instance. I mean, sure, anything could shake loose. Maybe some, Nikola Jokic demands a trade, and I'm just making that up as an example, but maybe someone really great demands a trade and then you jump in. But I don't think the Spurs feel compelled to go chasing people this summer. I think that's more of they're still building the foundation to where they're going to add that piece. And I would also say, like, everyone wants the big fish. They want to go trade for like an MVP candidate. And I get the appeal of that. But the Spurs are going to have one of those perennially in Victor Wembanyama. And maybe the best way to use those picks down the road is to trade for guys that are all-stars or borderline all-stars, but aren't like your top dogs. Like you're like the guy that changed Boston was Drew Holiday. Go get whatever the 2027 version of Drew Holiday is with those picks. Or even like a Derek White type guy that just fills in holes. I don't know that you're necessarily, I mean, maybe you're going to trade for Robin to Victor's Batman, but I don't know that you're necessarily going to have to do that. I think you can use those picks to trade for better caliber players than you're going to get in the draft and free agency, more ready to go, but they don't have to be Trae Young or someone like that who's already a quote unquote star.
It's going to be a patient build. Pop has said that over and over again.
How much patience can he have at 70?
He's coaching until he's in his 90s. So
those questions came from JT and Xavier, Nick.
Yes.
So just to speak for JT and Xavier here, I can sort of empathize with the frustration it must feel like as a fan, as a viewer, as a listener, to not get more definitive answers from yahoos like us. But the issue is that none of these questions can be answered in a vacuum. Like, you can't say they're going to make a trade for a star in the summer of 2025 as opposed to the summer of 2024, because everything changes, like Jeff alluded to. Maybe Nikola Jokic gets fed up in Denver and demands a trade. Maybe this summer, like, I'm not ruling out the possibility that this summer the Hawks get so desperate, get so motivated to get out from Trae Young's contract and start over with their top pick and with DeJounte Murray, that the price becomes so irresistible for the Spurs. Like, they can't turn it down, that of course you have to take Trae Young at a cheap price. You have to take Darius Garland again from Cleveland because the price is so low and because it makes so much sense. I'm not ruling any of that stuff out, but I think, as Jeff and Tom both alluded to just now, I think in a perfect world, the Spurs take this slow and steady and peak in the 2026, 2027 range and extend that peak for 6, 7, 8 years. There's other factors at play. Like, so far, I've written this, we've all talked about this. Victor Wembanyama has been the most mature, the most patient guy in San Antonio when it comes to this rebuild. You never know. Do the people around him start getting antsy? Does he start getting antsy? Does he say, hey, it's time now to go grab a star when we can? You never know. All this stuff can change. But if we're talking about just the plan, the master plan, I think it's show some moderate improvement this season. Add some pieces, take these picks, add some complementary players in free agency, and then really get ready for Bear the following year.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint. It's hard to pinpoint the who you trade for and when, because the situation on the ground just changes so rapidly. Like, if you'd told the Toronto Raptors in the summer of 2016, 2 years from now you're going to be trading for Kawhi Leonard and win a championship, that would all just be like gibberish to them. Because why is Kawhi Leonard even going to be available? He's under contract and seems happy in San Antonio. Stuff changes so quickly that you don't know who's going to be available and when and for what price.
All right.
What's next, Nick?
We got lots of questions. We covered it a little bit. We got lots of questions about people wanting to trade for either Darius Garland, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young. We talked about that a little bit. What are the benefits maybe of bringing back DeJounte Murray? And some people are asking about Andrew wants to know about the Chicago picks, maybe getting some of those picks back, or the Atlanta picks, and kind of using those to get a bigger superstar. I think everyone kind of wants a bigger superstar now. We kind of address being patient, but obviously some of these guys are available, especially maybe in Atlanta.
Skip no steps. Be patient. Get it out.
I mean, everything's going to be what's the price, right? Like, it's hard to answer these questions without knowing what's the price for DeJounte Murray. If I have to give you one first round pick down the road, sure, I've got plenty of those. But if they want if Atlanta wants all their picks from that back or most of them back, I don't know if you do that. Again, it's a matter of balancing, uh, uh, like you said, not skipping steps, not unnecessarily skipping steps. The Spurs are in no hurry. That's the main way I can answer most of those questions is the Spurs are in no hurry to we got to add a superstar right now this summer or everything's going to go to pot.
All right. Well, Gervin has a scenario for you. He wants to know whether or not you would give them the fourth and the eighth, or the fourth pick and a future pick. I believe that's what he's asking for DeJounte. Or for Trey.
That's interesting. And there are pluses and minuses. There are pros and cons. This in vivo was billed on all your social media channels as a peek inside the Spurs draft room. And I got a scoop for you. I'll give you a peek inside the Spurs draft room. I guarantee you that in the Spurs draft room, in the Spurs headquarters, they have scenarios where they say, if the price for Trae Young or DeJounte Murray or Darius Garland falls to this point where it's only going to cost us this, that we will do it. I guarantee you they have that scenario mapped out. Now, it's probably an unrealistic scenario in every case. The question, if you're asking Mike Finger and Tom Orsborn and Jeff McDonald, do you trade the number 4 pick in the 2024 draft and a, let's say, 2026 first rounder for DeJounte Murray right now? Mike Finger says yes. Like, I just think that's a known quantity. You know what you have in DeJounte Murray, a guy who fits into your system, a guy who'll make you better, a guy who sort of fits the timeline. He's going to be around for a while. It's not a quick fix. And if you're only giving up the number 4 pick in a draft where there's not a superstar that you're targeting there, sure, I do it. I'm not sure Atlanta does. And I'm not sure Brian Wright agrees with me or Greg Popovich agrees with me. But if you're asking me, yeah, I probably do that. Now, if it's 4 and 8 in a future first, like, I'm not so sure, but I'll open it up to my colleagues. But yeah, a deal like that sort of makes sense. I doubt that deal is available, but I think, yeah, sure. Like, that'd be awesome. Go ahead, guys.
My fantasy baseball team's in last place for like the 50th year in a row. So I'm the wrong one to be asking these. Whatever I say is wrong. Mm-hmm. I would have said no. So the opposite is probably correct.
Again, it depends on are the Spurs like in love with Stephon Castle at 4 or Reed Shepherd at 4? Right. DeJounte Murray's more expensive than those guys. He's going to make money. He's going to make his next extension. That's going to be more expensive than whatever the Reed Shepherd or Stephon Castle extension is going to be. But I think there's something to showing some improvement to the fans, to the listeners of this in vivo deal, to Victor Wembanyama and all the people around Victor Wembanyama that we're serious about winning. Those, like, Victor was, he's better than advertised. He's almost too good to be true in terms of his attitude, in terms of his maturity. But like, last year was hard on him. He'd never lost that many games in his life. And if you asked him right now, do you want to stop losing and bring in a guy who can help you start winning? He's going to say, of course. So all this stuff factors into it. I'm not going to dismiss.
Right.
Again, another great question from a listener, from a viewer. That's, you're kind of on the right track on the hard questions that these executives, that all the brains behind the Spurs are going to have to consider this week, next week, in the years to come. Those are tough questions. And I'm not sure there's an automatic answer for any of them.
Yeah, I don't think the Spurs are dismissing anything either. I think it's all on the table. Clearly you can't lose 60 games again.
Right.
Like, when you talk about I think the question becomes, do you make a huge move that gets you to 30, but then you're stuck there and have nowhere to go because you've used most of your capital to make the move to get you to 30 or 35? And that's what I think. That's the risk of trading for like a Trae Young. Is clearly he will make you better next year. But is there a cap on that ceiling? And if there is, you've lost all your assets to add and fill in those holes. And I don't know that Spurs want to lock themselves into that right now.
Yeah, is your move making another step toward building a long-term championship contender, or is it just
That's really
to win 50 games?
That's really the thing. Like the Spurs are trying to build a perennial championship contender, not
let's get 50 wins,
or compete for the playoffs next year.
Yeah.
Like if you can, great, but that's not the overriding goal. It's every move has to be, is this going to work out for us 4 years from now?
That's why a move like, I wouldn't be too quick to dismiss the idea of like a Darius Garland. And like Jeff said earlier, Darius Garland is not the other half of a big two with Victor Wembanyama. Darius Garland is a borderline all-star type. But and I'm getting all this kind of second and third hand around here at the finals this week. It sounds like Darius Garland is more attainable. Is you can get him for less than you would for the Atlanta guards, and maybe he doesn't have the immediate impact that one of the Atlanta guards has, but it's a definite upgrade, and he does cool stuff that the Spurs need. And if you do not sacrifice your future flexibility, and if you continue to stay on that path where you're trying to peak in 2026, 2027, that makes a heck of a lot of sense, and it makes the fans happy, and it makes Victor happy because it leads to more wins next year. I think those are the types of deals that the Spurs are probably pondering right now.
I think the Nuggets are a good comp for maybe what the Spurs want to do. And I know the Nuggets did not do well in defending their title this year, but they've got Nikola Jokic, and who's their other all-star? They don't have one.
Right.
But they have a guy that's pretty good in Jamal Murray, guy that's pretty good in Aaron Gordon, and a lot of guys that do their roles right.
And that's
kind of what the Spurs are looking to build, because they have their Jokic. Wemby is their Jokic.
Right. And that Aaron Gordon deal is a good template for the Spurs. It's someone was pointing out not too long ago, it might have been one of the more impactful deals of the past 5 or 6 years in the league. Sure. And it was completely under the radar. It wasn't one of those Kevin Durant demands out type of deals. I think it was a deadline deal. And it didn't steal any of the headlines. Like, Aaron Gordon's a good player, but no one thought, oh, this is going to define the championship race for the next 5 years.
And more of those type of deals, those type of moves are the ones that are building championship teams.
Right.
It's not going out and getting Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal to add to Devin Booker. Like the big three era is over, I think. I don't think teams are going to be able to construct their it used to be you had to have a big three, a quote unquote big three to compete for a championship. I don't think that's true anymore. I think you really have to focus on the team building part of it.
Yeah.
I want to know, is listener or participant Gervin Williams? Is that the birth certificate name, Gervin? That's pretty cool.
Don't know. He'll have to answer that one in the chat.
Gervin Williams, I like that.
We do have a couple other questions here. Pat wants to know, we were talking about Wemby and his influence on the team. He wants to know how much Wemby will have a say in what the picks do, what these picks are, or what the Spurs do going forward. Do they consult him? Do they say, hey, Wemby, who do you want us to take? Who do you think you'll fit with?
I think
run it by him.
Yeah, I think there's a way to put this. Like, I do think you have to be careful not to get in a situation where he's calling all the shots, but you also don't want to do something that he's completely off board with. So there's a gray area that everyone involved is going to want to walk. But he's very interested in what's going on. Clearly, like, this is his future. This is his team. Victor wants to build a long-term championship contending team here. So yeah, he's definitely going to have some say. And they won't do anything that they don't run by him.
Is he the decider? No,
probably not. Yeah,
but do they run it by him?
And if he was at like, absolutely not, we cannot do this, then I think they would really take that.
Or if there's someone he really wants to, pump up, they're going to listen.
You don't want him to get into the LeBron James area where he's playing GM, and it doesn't always work out because you're just adding your Russell Westbrooks and your
giving big contracts to Tristan Thompson.
Yes.
I've said this before, but what was it, a year and a month ago? Tom Orsborn was in a really secure location. He watched the lottery balls drop out in May of 2023, behind the scenes in that room with Brian Wright and everybody who had to turn their phones over. The moment that last lottery ball fell into place, that precise second, the identity of the most important person in the entire Spurs organization changed. And Victor Wembanyama, immediately in that second, his opinion mattered more than anybody else, from the owner to the head coach to any player in the locker room. Like, he became the team's future. And like Jeff just mentioned, he's not playing LeBron James GM. Like, I don't think he's looking at combine footage, or maybe he is, and saying we need to go with Reed Shepherd over Stephon Castle or whatever. But you'd be insane if you were Brian Wright to not check with the most important person in the entire organization before you do something major. And I don't think Victor Wembanyama, we've gotten to know him pretty well over the past year. I don't see him as a guy that is demanding, like, say so. I don't think he's calling Brian every day and saying, hey, you need to clear this with me. I think that's just a courtesy that they give him, which makes total sense. Like, it would shock me if Victor's just sitting there saying, you have to trade for my friend Zachary Risache. Like, you have to do this. I don't think he's doing that. But I think if he feels strongly about something, he'll speak up. And again, the Spurs would be foolish not to consult him on stuff like this.
When you're that player, and Duncan was the same way, you have to have trust in the organization as well.
Right.
To know that maybe I really want to do this, but they explain to me why they can or won't, or why it's not in our long-term interest. And it takes some trust on the player's part to buy into that.
All right, we only got a few minutes left. I'm going to try to get two
lightning round.
Lightning round. We're going to try to get 2 questions in here. We got several people asking, Abby as well, asking, when the season starts, what players won't be on the roster anymore to make room for some of these picks? What guys will we not be cheering on next year?
When the season starts, oh man, you want to pick a guy?
We'll start with the obvious. Somehow. Start with the obvious, just to review for Abby and for the listeners, the guys.
Cedi Osman will be a free agent, so he probably will not be back. So that would be one guy.
Yeah.
Is Mamu coming back? There's an option there, right?
Yeah, someone did ask about Mamu as well.
Just again, depends on how camp shakes out.
People want definitive answers. Say it with your chest, as the kids say. Make a prediction as to a guy who won't be there. Abby wants to know. Abby, maybe our first female question of the day. We need more diversity in our questions here. Like, Nick, look for more. We don't want any more JTs. Like we want to answer everybody. Abby asked a good question here.
You don't know what JT is?
Well,
you're assuming.
Jennifer also asked the question about DeJounte Murray.
Jennifer.
So we did touch on her question. Okay. She wanted to know about DeJounte Murray coming back. So we got her question answered as well.
But don't blow off Abby. Don't blow off Abby. Who's not?
Well, we said Cedi Osman. Was there? Do we have to give another answer too, or what?
Who's Devontae Graham be back?
Yeah, see, he might be a guy that's a candidate to go. I mean, he is. There's an option there, or not an option, but like, he's not completely guaranteed. I do think there's a scenario where if it works out numbers wise, they keep him around just to have that contract to trade later. But if they need the space, he's a guy that's easy to let loose for a little bit of money. Or
Julian Champagne's
another guy that's easy to let go.
Guaranteed. Easy to let go. Easy to let go.
Easy to let go if you need the numbers. You need the spot.
Okay.
And if they do make a deal, Keldon, almost certainly will be included in the package. Yeah.
Thank you, Abby. We did one of the best questions. Like, put it to us, and that resulted in some good answers there from Jeff and Tom.
Now we're on the record.
Now you're on the record.
Nervous couple of days.
We only got a minute left, but I'll end it on a pretty highbrow question here. Miguel wants to know: the Spurs are in the middle of a rebuilding right here, but Greg Popovich is an older coach. What happens if he retires and they're still rebuilding, and how do they move forward?
Here's an easy answer. He is never retiring. He's like Tom Orsborn, never retiring.
Yeah, I agree. I see no signs
whatsoever. You agree for Pop or you?
Not for me, but I see no signs whatsoever that Pop's.
I mean, the question is valid, though. I was being facetious. The question is valid. When a coach is the oldest coach who has ever coached in the history of the NBA, there's always that chance that it's going to end abruptly. So
yeah, God forbid a medical
what happens
comes up, but hey, he loves it. He's energized. He loves working with these kids.
What happens will be interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think the reason he's around, a big benefit of having him around still is the sort of gravitas he gives that position. So when you have a guy like Victor Wembanyama, does he trust the organization? Well, we have Pop here. And if it's somebody else in that chair, maybe it's a different level of trust.
I'll wrap it up. Try quick. I know we're hitting the end, but there's 3 ways that Greg Popovich stops coaching. There to answer Miguel here.
Do we want to go here?
Number 1, the Spurs win a championship under Victor Wembanyama, and Greg Popovich at 80 whatever years old says, finally, okay, that's it. Number 2 is something very sad happens. I'm not going to dwell on that, but he's not just going to retire. Like it's going to be a medical type of thing that he can't do anymore, can't go anymore. The third one is Victor Wembanyama says, I don't want Greg Popovich to be the head coach anymore. Like we're not close to that yet, but that's the other way that it stops. We're being real here. If the moment Victor Wembanyama says, I don't want Greg Popovich to be my coach anymore, Greg Popovich probably is not going to be his coach anymore because Victor Wembanyama is the most important person in the organization. Don't aggregate this. I'm not saying that that's even close to happening yet, but those are the 3 outcomes for this, the way I see it.
The Express News and the San Antonio Light used to run a semi-annual poll of the most powerful sports figures in San Antonio. And yeah, it's no brainer. Like we've been talking about, Victor's number 1. If we did that poll today.
Narrowly beating out Mike Finger.
Narrow. True. It's very close.
There were some journalists.
Well, his mom voted.
There were some journalists who made that elite poll year after year. So Mike,
maybe Dan Cook.
Dan Cook always did. Yeah.
Well, all right.
Buck Harvey.
We appreciate everyone's questions today. We need to be wrapping up. We appreciate everyone coming in. Thanks for Jeff and Tom for coming, and thanks for Mike joining us remotely from the NBA Finals. And
thank you.
As Mike says,
questions.
Keep join us later and keep it real.
Let him take us out.
Take us out, Mike. You know what? You do it better.
Everybody.
Take us out.
Take care of each other. Keep it real. We'll see you next time.
There we go.